Hi everyone, welcome to TNETS Importing Food and Food Products into Singapore webinar. We hope everyone's doing great. So introducing myself, I'm Elena, Business Development Executive from TNETS. Before we begin, we would like to thank all participants who are here with us today for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for this webinar. So today, we'll be addressing the compliance and regulations for importing food and food products into Singapore. Should you have any questions along the way, please do type it out in the chat box and we will try to cover as many questions as possible. If you are unable to answer you in this session, we will email the answers to your respective questions. So before we deep dive into the topic of the day, let me share a bit about us and what we do. So TNETS have evolved from professionalizing customs declaration operations to creating innovative, secure, and efficient customs technology that has led to the development of straight-through processing and self-filing applications. We have reshaped the customs landscape for the benefit of shippers and forwarders, both large and small. Our mission is to drive real change in the customs services and technology industry globally. We pride ourselves as the leader of customs and trade management, as we are the #1 leading customs brokerage service provider in the region. We maintain uncompromised standards of services across Asia. We are a strategic cross-border, pan-regional compliance partner and an advanced trade technology specialist. We've been around for 18 years. Annually, we cleared about 1.8 million permits worth almost 200 billion USD with 99.9% accuracy. We have operations in United Kingdom, Hong Kong, Indonesia, our neighbor Malaysia, and here in Singapore, where our headquarters is. We are growing globally and on the constant exploration of entering new markets. We do have various partner network which is covered by many countries around the world. So unfortunately, my colleague Amy is not available today. So sitting in for Amy is TNETS founder and business development director, Mr. Neil Johnson. Without further ado, over to you, Neil.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much for that intro, Elena, and looking forward to going through this quite involved and quite important topic. It's one of the subject areas that we get the most inquiries from clients and potential clients about. So we thought we'd try to wrap as much as possible into a webinar, which will hopefully give those of you out there who are looking at bringing food and food products into Singapore at least a starting point, if not a little bit more than that. So the agenda that we're going to go through is as follows. So we're going to talk about how food products are classified in Singapore, what you need to understand about licensing and registration as an importer of food, and then what legislation covers those imports. We'll then also cover the critical information on labeling, which applies to food, and then quite a tricky area is specific conditions relating to specific food types. Now, as you'll see as we go through this is quite a major area. We'll cover off absolutely as much of it as we can, but it may be that we need to do deep dives on subsequent webinars for this. Okay, so then the sixth area is actually getting approval to move your food products across the border into Singapore. We'll look at how you book inspections, if those are required after the goods have landed. And then finally, probably most importantly, if you're running a food import business, is how you actually calculate the total landed costs of your food imports into Singapore. So we're going to go through a bit of information on how food and food products in Singapore are classified. So the first thing I should say is that this classification is now handled under a single agency. So it used to be that there were multiple agencies which governed food and food imports in Singapore. It's now all under the auspices of Singapore Food Agency, So if you need a license, if you need to register your products, it's all done through a Singapore Food Agency. Okay. Now, in terms of the classification that we talked about, Singapore Food Agency breaks products down into these areas. So you've got meat, those are subject to specific legislation, fish, fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh eggs, processed food, processed eggs, which are handled differently to fresh eggs, and then also food appliances. So food appliances is a bit of a strange one, but that also comes under food products. What is considered meat? This might sound pretty obvious, but let's just give you a quick definition. So as far as Singapore Food Agency is concerned, meat is the whole carcasses or parts of carcasses of any animal or bird for human consumption. These can be chilled, could be processed in some way, frozen, etc. And essentially, in order for SFA to regard a product as meat, it would have to contain at least 5% of meat content, which includes animal oil and fat. So that's a very succinct definition. We'll go over in a little bit more detail as to what the conditions are relating to imports of meat. Fish, so these are freshwater and marine fish, and it could be other seafood creatures. And it doesn't matter what form they're in, whether live, chilled, canned, etc. So some examples are whole fish and seafood products such as abalone and anchovies. But then there's also things like mixed seafood dumplings, shumai, which are obviously hybrid products. Fresh fruit and vegetables. So these are handled differently to their processed equivalents. So if the fruit or vegetables are cut, peeled, packaged, then those come under processed food, okay? So examples here, seaweed, sugarcane, obviously all the different types of fruits and vegetables. Then got fresh eggs. So fresh eggs, a lot of very specific legislation around fresh eggs, which is different to the other categories, so that's why they have their own product grouping. And these are essentially eggs derived from domestic birds. So that would include, all the sort of hens, ducks, geese, partridges, and pigeon eggs. And then processed eggs. So this will be all kinds of eggs that's undergone some kind of processing, packaging, preparation. And again, this breaks down into a large number of subcategories. Some of these that are not considered under meat products or fish product would be processed food. So things like mineral water, wine, all kinds of dairy products. And then finally, food appliances. So they have their own category. So these are typically foodware, essentially anything which comes into contact with food, which is not run by electricity. So kind of a strange one, but it does come under food. Okay, and finally, the one which is not really one of the 7 categories, but we thought we'd mention it here anyway, is novel food. So novel food is, it's got quite a broad definition, but essentially it's food which doesn't have a long history of consumption by humans. So, for example, the new kinds of cultured meat, like the Impossible Burger, etc., etc. So, although it's processed food, it's also considered novel food. And the way we sort of make the distinction is that novel foods are sort of unconventional foods. They're not part of the local food ecosystem traditionally, and then conventional foods are obviously the ones that we've talked about in those 7 categories. Now, the important thing to say here is that whilst it may be tempting to view novel foods as just sort of regular processed food, SFA is looking at it very closely. They've actually got a whole department which is looking at the sort of the inspection and test requirements for these items. But for the time being, it's all going on a kind of a case-by-case basis. So that's the thing to say about novel foods. Okay, so what you need to know in terms of licensing and registration. So, in order to get your food import business going, there's a few prerequisites. We're going to go through those very, very quickly without sort of dwelling on too much of the detail, because each of these areas is quite a broad topic. So firstly, the sort of, the step-by-step guide is, basically you register your company, you register with Singapore Customs, get a gyro in place if you're going to be paying the import duty and import GST between your bank and Singapore Customs. Appoint us as your declaring agent, which is obviously what we recommend. There are other declaring agents available, I should point that out. And then check whether your food products need a license or whether you just need to register them. And we'll explain a bit more about what that distinction is as we go through. So if you do need to register or do need to obtain licenses with SFA, then obviously you'll proceed to do that. Or, alternatively, you could appoint us to do it on your behalf, and we can explain how that's done. And then when it comes to actually moving the goods into Singapore, you'll submit your shipping documents to us. We will obtain the cargo clearance permit on your behalf, and the goods will then be allowed to be physically cleared into Singapore. And then the final step is if, as a condition of the import, and I'll explain what we mean by a condition of the import, if there is a condition that you're required to have your goods inspected, then we'll explain to you how you go about doing that. Okay, so firstly, very quickly, to register a company, you register with ACRA using the BizFile website, so we've given you that there. You then register with Singapore Customs. It's quite a straightforward process. Again, the link is there. The NTP is the networked trade platform, and that's the portal that all trade activities with government are conducted through. So you would then activate your customs account. If you're going to be paying the duty and GST yourself, then you'll need to get a gyro in place. That's a relatively straightforward process, but does involve you liaising with your bank and then waiting for the bank to get that form into Singapore Customs and being notified by Singapore Customs that that is all in place. Then you're able to appoint TNETS as your declaring agent, so we can then handle your affairs with Singapore Customs, work on your behalf in making customs declarations. There's quite a lot of self-help on the Singapore Food Agency website. It's a lot of it is very clear. A lot of it is a little more involved. So what we always say is go and have a look yourselves. If you get stuck, come back to us. Or alternatively, just come to us. We'll tell you what you need to apply for, and like I said, we can even do the application on your behalf. So then you get your licenses in place. What I was saying about licenses versus registration. So if you're going to bring in meat or fish, you would definitely need a license. Now, if you're, if you're not bringing in these products, then all you will need to do is get your registration in place. Okay, so if it's processed food and food appliances, then you will only need to register in general. Okay, there are specific foods that have pretty onerous registration requirements, but it's still a registration versus a license. Okay, so in order to get a license, you do need to register, but unless you're bringing meat and fish, fresh fruit, vegetables, and fresh eggs as opposed to processed eggs, you won't need a license. So all of the above, license required, all of the below, no license required. Then it comes to the part that we will obtain on your behalf the cargo clearance permit. That's where I was saying that this allows you to physically move the goods into Singapore. So the goods may have landed. They will be held by customs until you actually make the customs declaration. As many of you will know, if you are involved in importing of any other products, you've got a very short time window, whether you're importing by air or importing by ocean, to get your goods cleared once they've landed. Otherwise, you start incurring what they call customs storage, and that can mount up very, very rapidly. So we always recommend get yourselves organized before the goods arrive, get the documents to us, and we will make the declaration on your behalf so that you've got your cargo clearance permit ready for when the goods actually land. And then finally, there's the inspection. So if these are required, it will be advised as a condition on the cargo clearance permit. That comes out of the previous step. So on the cargo clearance permit, it will have a number of conditions. One of these may be that you need to present the food for physical inspection. Now, having gone through those those 8 steps, what we're going to do is cover off, unfortunately not in as much detail as we like, but we're going to cover off the legislation which surrounds the importing of food into Singapore. So firstly, there is the Sale of Food Act, which governs the sale of food, but also governs the import of food. Okay, so irrespective of the type of food you're importing, there is the Sale of Food Act to consider. Now, if you're importing meat and fish, then there's the Wholesome Meat and Fish Act. Fresh fruit and vegetables, it's got its own act, Control of Plants, and fresh and processed eggs is the Animal and Birds Act. And then food appliances is just considered under the Sale of Food Act. So the Sale of Food Act, let's start with that one because that covers most products, covers all products, in fact. So this is essentially broad brush. It's intended to ensure that food that's presented is safe and suitable for human consumption. There's also the element of promoting public health in there, and the anti-negative of preventing misleading conduct in connection with sale of food. So this would typically be where you have to not make claims to certain health benefits for a food. You have to label food in a certain way. So that's all covered by the Sale of Food Act. The Wholesome Meat and Fish Act, this regulates a number of areas. So crucially for us, it covers the import of meat products and fish. And this will essentially tell you how goods should be processed, how they should be packed, and what the rules are around inspection, certification, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of detail in there. We can't go to as much detail as we'd like for the purposes of this webinar, but we can perhaps do another webinar which goes into a sort of deeper dive. But we will talk a little bit more about some of the specific conditions relating to meat. And the important thing to say is, these pieces of legislation have teeth and they bite on a regular basis. So this is a fairly recent one. Some of you may have read this, a bit of a shocker, but, I would guess that this is not atypical of what people try and do. Quite an extreme case in this instance. So 200 kilos of frozen meat attempted to be imported. And the important thing to say here is that, yes, Singapore Food Agency is the governing body, but it also works very closely with Singapore Immigration and Singapore Customs for the detection of these kind of cases. The fresh fruit and vegetables are covered under the Control of Plants Act. So this covers not only cultivation and export of plants, but also critically for our purposes, the import and transshipment of fruit and vegetables. And So again, legislation which has some very sharp teeth. Again, another recent case. We're seeing more and more of these, I guess. With people trying to diversify, being creative with sources of food. There are people trying to bring in food from all different places, and clearly there was a temptation in this case to either misdeclare, underdeclare, or not even declare fully all of the goods that were being brought in. And again, cooperation between Singapore Food Agency and Singapore Customs. These guys were caught and penalized. Okay, then fresh eggs and processed eggs are covered under the Animal and Birds Act. So this, eggs are obviously a sensitive subject because of the number of potential diseases that they can carry if they're not, properly cared for. So there's a lot of very specific legislation around this. And again, there are prosecutions on a fairly regular basis. Singapore is increasing its production of eggs domestically, I guess because of the sensitivity that it regards that particular food source. Okay, going to move on to before I carry on, I'd just like to remind everybody, please do feel free to post questions. There is a little questions section in the GoToWebinar application. So feel free to tap in a question there. We'll try and get to those before the end of this webinar. So I'm going to talk a bit about labeling. Again, this is a huge area. It's something which has got very specific legislation around it. And again, under the auspices of the Singapore Food Agency. So in terms of labeling standards, there's a requirement, obviously, to list what ingredients have gone into the food. There is a sort of a catch-all warning on allergens. So it's not as detailed as you would find in, for example, the US or Europe. But you are required to state whether there are potential allergens in the food that you're importing. And you're also required to disclose the country of origin and which was the business that produced it. So the name of the food, statements on the ingredients, the quantities. Another critical aspect, and we talked about this just now, is labeling. So the labeling requirement in Singapore is that the lowercase has to be at least 1.5 millimeters in height. Now that's not very big. So the labeling requirement is there. You have to put labels, but they also give you the sort of standard minimum height. Again, the legislation's there for a reason. SFA can and does prosecute. So this is one of the predecessor agencies of Singapore Food Agency, the AVA, Agri-Food and Veterinary Authority. So part of AVA was rolled into SFA when SFA was created 3 years ago. So this is from a little while back, not that long ago, 5 years ago. So there was a case where products were mislabeled and put out for sale. So labeling's a critical area. Okay, I mentioned there are specific conditions relating to food types. Now, each different food type, each one of those 7 categories has conditions relating to food, and those break down into different subgroups. It's not going to be possible to cover every single one of them. I think I mentioned that meat is one which comes up a lot. So we'll go over some of the specifics related to meat. Singapore is very, very picky about where it gets its meat from. Okay. Now, as you can see from the map, from the graphic there, there is a huge amount of Singapore's meat that comes from Brazil. Okay, Brazil is a massive meat exporting country, exports meat all over the world. And part of the reason for that is the quality of, not only the quality of meat, but the quality of the certification and inspection regime in Brazil. And same thing for Malaysia. There's quite a large percentage of meat that comes from Malaysia, and then followed by Australia. So those are not the only countries where you can import meat from. In fact, there's a huge number of countries that you could be importing meat from. Those are approved sources of meat. But in each country, you also need to find an approved exporter or an approved processor. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on this next slide. So, firstly, the food needs to come from an approved source. It has to meet all the veterinary conditions. There has to be an animal health certificate, and then the food labeling for the import have to be accurate and complete. Okay, so food labels, the labels that go on food which is imported are different to those which go on to food when it is being sold. Okay, so we need to make that distinction. I just want to talk a little bit about animal health certificates. Actually, we'll cover that in a subsequent slide, so just give me a minute on that. Okay, so I mentioned about the approved sources. Now, I don't expect you to get your magnifying glasses out at this point and go through the fine detail of this. Okay, but it's important to know that this matrix exists. So what we have down the left-hand side are all the different countries. So we've got countries in Europe, countries in Oceania, so Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, South America, and then the rest of Asia. Across the top, you've then got the different meat and meat products, and they're also broken down. So if you take pork, for example, it's broken down into chilled, frozen, processed, and canned. Now, it may be that your source of mutton cannot also be a source of beef. So just because a country is approved as a source of meat, it doesn't mean that it's approved in all those categories. And even in the subcategories, your source may be approved for chilled meat, but it may not be approved as a source of canned meat. Okay. Now, what does that look like in practice? Because in practical terms, this slide is obviously not very helpful because there's far too much detail. But what we've done a summary which takes these three countries, so Brazil, Australia, Switzerland, and just looked at the headline meat products, so mutton, beef, and pork. So in the case of Brazil, Brazil is an approved source of mutton. It is an approved source of beef, and it is an approved source of pork, okay? But there are conditions. So if you look at Brazil as a source of mutton, it's okay, but there hasn't been an establishment, a producer or an exporter which has been approved as an exporter of mutton yet, okay? As far as beef is concerned, it's approved except for processed beef, and for pork it's approved except for chilled beef. Australia is approved across the board, and Switzerland is approved for mutton and pork, but interestingly, Switzerland is not an approved source of beef, okay? And then closer to home, if we look at Malaysia, Singapore Food Agency makes a distinction between meat coming from Peninsular Malaysia and meat coming from East Malaysia. So again, if you read across, you can get mutton from Peninsular Malaysia, but you can't get it from East Malaysia. Likewise for beef, but you can bring in chilled and frozen pork from East Malaysia. Okay, so that's how that matrix works, the one that we're referring to here. It's available on the Singapore Food Agency website. If you can't find it, shoot us a message, shoot us an email, and we will help you out. Okay, continuing on with meat. We talked about having to meet all the veterinary conditions. So some of these might be the meat having to have been derived from animals which are slaughtered, processed, packed, and stored under sanitary conditions. There are lots of other conditions related to this. It's a complicated area, as I think we mentioned. Now, a lot of this is resolved by having the animal health certificate in place, because that will cover off a lot of this information. You will find that the countries which export a lot of meat, so places like Brazil, like Australia, like New Zealand, like the United States, they have a pretty robust inspection and animal health certificate production regime in place. So it's relatively easy to get the animal health certificate for these products. The animal health certificate will talk about the details of the product, so the details of the meat, which abattoir was used, the date on which the animal was slaughtered, and it will also detail the country of dispatch, obviously, but also critically the country of destination. And different trade lanes have different requirements. So the animal health certificate that's produced for Singapore from Brazil will not necessarily be the same certificate that's produced for example, Hong Kong or the European Union. Okay, so it's important to note, you need to get the one which meets the Singapore criteria. And as I mentioned, generally speaking, those major exporters of meat and animal products, they're pretty well, they have this pretty well under control. Okay, labels. We talked about labels. Again, this is not the kind of label you will see in the supermarket. This is the label that goes on food which is imported. So it's not a point of sale label. It's very different. This will again talk about the some of the details, the weight, the pack date, etc., etc. Now, interestingly, in the case of Australia, Australia has a fully digitized system which covers about 60% of meat exports, where you can obtain this data electronically. So that's something that we're exploring on behalf of some of our importers, so that we can actually do a two-way exchange of data. We can read in, for example, as you can see there, the barcode, and that will give us the critical information that we need in making the declaration. So, as I mentioned, it will include the date the meat's processed, the name of the slaughterhouse. So all of those details are contained on that barcode. Okay, so getting towards the sort of the sharp end, you're now ready to get your products onto a ship and get them into Singapore. So what do you need to know? So firstly, you will need to obtain a cargo clearance permit. Okay, you can ship goods to Singapore. Until you actually have the cargo clearance permit in place, they will sit in customs. So it's very, very important to take note of this. You need both the Singapore Food Agency registration and license, if applicable, to your food. You also need the cargo clearance permit. We get a lot of people who approach us at the last minute and say, but I've got my license. And now Singapore Customs is telling me I can't have my goods. What do I do? Okay, so this is it. Essentially, this is a critical role that we play. So we help you obtain the cargo clearance permit. We take the critical information from the bill of lading or the airway bill, the packing list, the commercial invoice, and the import license or registration that you have. We will synthesize that information into a customs declaration that will go through our system to Singapore Customs. Singapore Customs will approve it, and then the goods can be moved across the border into Singapore. So some of the prerequisites to take note of. So your clearing agent, so TNETS in this case, we have to be approved under the Declaring Agents Governance Framework, the DAGF, which came in around 9 years ago. The customs declarant, i.e. the individual, has to have passed the Singapore Customs certification. And then finally, the declaration has to go through approved software. So all of those prerequisites, obviously, we have in place, but those are the requirements. Now, here's the process. So this is essentially the sort of the step-by-step as to how it works. So you as the importer, you will have the commercial invoice, you will have your bill of lading, you'll have your licenses. So you send us those documents. We do have customers that send everything to us electronically through their system, maybe from their ERP system, SAP, for example. But in most cases, these will come to us in PDF copies by email. We will then strip out the critical information and apply for the import permit. And if there is a requirement to submit any additional documents related to the import, then we'll do that as attachments. And we will then get back the approved CCP, which is cargo clearance permit, which is the import permit. So import license, import permit, okay? And then you can pass the cargo clearance permit to your transporter, to your trucker, who will then be able to take that to the airport, to the cargo terminal, or to the marine port, container port, and physically take delivery of your goods and bring them to your place. Okay, so there's a few benefits of using someone like us. Irrespective of how many freight forwarders you use, you can still use TNETS. We're obviously, we have our in-house customs qualified people. Critically, we run 24/7. So as long as the ports are open, we are working. So whether it's Chinese New Year, whether it's Christmas Day, whether it's Easter, Hari Raya, you name it, we are on duty. We can deal with whatever spikes you have. So if you're a specialist for Chinese New Year or Christmas, then we've got you covered. We've got a huge number of people that work on this stuff with us, so we can manage the load, particularly at peak times. These might be quarter end or month end. When we have a single focus on customs, that's all we do. We only deal with customs and trade matters. We have our own software, as I mentioned. So all of this delivers the lowest possible cost of compliance, the fastest turnaround because you're dealing direct. And critically, we have that in-depth knowledge of the customer requirements related to the food industry. So we can help you with looking up your products, telling you which licenses you need, and then also critically help you get them across the border. Okay, and the final topic on the actual movement of goods is how you go about dealing with inspections. Now, these are relatively rare, I have to say, in Singapore. Not every single consignment of food will be inspected. Our supermarkets would grind to a halt if that was the case. So these will be required on a case-by-case basis. Typically, it will be for first imports of meat and fish from certain sources. So you will get the notification on your cargo clearance permit, which we produced in that previous step, which will tell you which of your import consignments require inspection, if any. Okay, so you would then need to, so you can take delivery of the goods, but you would then need to make a booking for inspection, okay, before you can do anything else with those goods. So you go to the SFA website, they've got a little portal for food inspections, and you provide some critical detail, principally who they're dealing with, the cargo clearance permit information, and they will then acknowledge and give you the notification, and that notification will be sent to you by email or SMS. So at the time of the inspection, what you need is the cargo clearance permit, the invoices and the health certificates, if those apply, and actually the actual consignment of food, which has been called for inspection. Quite obviously, but that's it may not be obvious to everybody. Okay, and the final topic that we're going to cover, again, we've sort of blitzed through this in 1 hour. I know we've already had requests to do specific sessions on imports of meat or imports of different types of fruit and vegetables. So we'll try and get those on at a later date. But the last topic that we're going to cover, again, as I mentioned, critical if you're in business, is calculating your total landed costs of your food imports. So we've broken these down into the costs that you will incur at the origin. So these will typically be the handling costs, the procure costs, i.e. what it costs you to buy the actual product in the first place from the producer. Then you've got the export customs costs and freight charges. Then there is the actual import into Singapore. So you have your import duties and taxes, the cost of obtaining the cargo clearance permit, any haulage charges, and then the charges for getting the goods from your distributor, if you're using one, or your warehouse operator, to your actual storefront. So in a sort of, in a graphic presentation, it kind of goes like this. You've got your procured costs, your origin cost. And when I say origin costs, what I mean is the cost for collecting the goods from your producer. So those may be borne in the invoice by the producer, but as sure as anything, you're paying for it. The costs of doing the exports. Now, the important thing to say is that in general, with all products, there are very few export duties, but there are in some cases. So if for example, you're exporting meat or importing meat from Argentina, the exporter will incur export duties. Okay, it's kind of an anomaly because obviously most countries want to encourage exports as far as possible for the generation of foreign currency. So then you'll get into the import side. You'll have your import duties, import taxes. So those are two different things. Import duties in Singapore would only apply on liquor in terms of food products. There's no import duties on food as such. But there are some very specific things related to rice, but that's a kind of a separate topic. And then haulage charges, and then your charges to physically receive the goods into your facility. Now, again, this is an area that we can help customers with, because we typically have access to all of these, the breakdown of all these costs when we're processing the import customs entry. So we will see, for example, what the cost of your procured goods were, what the origin costs were, etc. Now, obviously, we'll be calculating the import duties and taxes, so we know those. And then the only thing you need to add on to that, which we wouldn't necessarily have visibility of, is the haulage charges and whatever it costs to get your goods to the point of sale. We're almost at the end. There's one more very important topic. Don't forget that when you apply for a license to import food or food products, one of the costs will be the cost of the license itself. Thankfully, in Singapore, these are relatively minor. But again, it's a topic that comes up time and time again. But we paid for an import license. Why do we have to pay GST, et cetera, et cetera? So don't get confused. These are the steps in the process to get yourself approved for the specific food type that you're looking to import. Okay, so I'm going to do a very quick recap. Okay, and then we're going to get on to the Q&A. Okay, so very quickly, what we said is that we want to check your food classification. Remember the 7 groups that we talked about at the start of the webinar. You then need to apply assuming your company's already set up, you need to get your license and registration in place with Singapore Food Agency. Singapore Food Agency is really the go-to guy now, okay? You don't need to go to AVA or NEA or the Health Sciences Authority. So it's all under one roof. Make sure you can comply with the food legislation, satisfy whatever labeling requirements there are, and then if there are specific conditions related to your food type, look up what those are well in advance. Get your import permit in place. Obviously, we'll help you with that. And then, if you do need to get your products inspected, get those inspections booked and organized. And now we're going to take there's been a few questions come in, I can see. So I'm going to hand over to Elena, and she's going to quiz me and test my knowledge. Okay, so let's see how that goes.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Okay, so we shall move on to the questions and answers segment. Okay, so are you ready for the first question?
Yep, fire away.
Okay, so first question. What is the differences between import license and import permit?
Okay, so again, I think hopefully we covered that in some detail, but if it's come up as a question, then I haven't done my job. So the import permit, very critically, is what you apply for when you identify a certain food type, a food group that you want to bring into Singapore. You will then have the license in place from the Singapore Food Agency, which authorizes you to deal in that product. Once you've got that in place, then you can look at physically importing the goods into Singapore, and that goes through Singapore customs. So that's basically the distinction. Okay, hopefully that answers that question. If whoever asked that, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on now, but whoever asked that, then if it's not clear, then do please message us offline.
Okay, so next question. Here's something that I'll actually ask myself. Can all the information be submitted electronically?
Okay, good question. And yes, one of those, I'm glad you asked me that questions. Sort of is the answer. So when we deal with Singapore Food Agency, we are dealing with electronic forms. So we are submitting forms through their portal. Some of the information that you need to submit will be in scanned copies. So it's not, so although we can say electronically yes, we can't say it's fully digitized. When it comes to making a customs declaration to obtain the cargo clearance permit, that is fully digitized. That's all in structured data format. So, things like animal health certificates, for example, those very often move around the world in PDF copies. So there isn't a global standard for those yet. There have been standards that have been talked about. There are things that are being used and trialed in different countries, but we're not there yet. And again, hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, so moving on. Where do I apply for import license for food? And can you apply on my behalf?
Okay, well, it's very simple. Singapore Food Agency is your go-to guy. As I said, it used to be split amongst 3 agencies until about 3 years ago. So Singapore Food Agency, I have to say, has done an excellent job of grouping together all of that information, all of those standards, and putting it under one roof. So yeah, the license comes from Singapore Food Agency. And the good news is, yes, you can appoint us to apply for those licenses on your behalf. And there is a way of doing it which, if you know how to do it, it's quite straightforward. If you don't know how to do it, then we can guide you on that.
Okay, so here's a question that we didn't touch on earlier on, but how do I know what's the correct HS code for the food that I wish to import?
Yes. Okay. So HS code, for those who are not aware, the HS refers to the harmonized system of the World Trade Organization, the WTO. So there is a global agreement which covers 99% of all trade transactions around the world. which is which product code applies to which product group. And it's not just for food, it's also for all types of goods. So iron ore, cars, semiconductors. Now, as far as food is concerned, it's quite a complicated area. It's navigable, but it's quite complicated. There are public directories available where you can key in a food group. But if, for example, you key in something like butter into one of these public directories, you will get references for dairy butter, you'll get references for peanut butter, you'll get references for cocoa butter, et cetera, and those all have different product codes, different HS codes. So typically we will do this at the time, we will do the classification at the time of import declaration. And we with our knowledge and experience, we're very, very accurate with this stuff. Okay, do you have any more questions?
Just one final question.
Okay.
I'm a wine importer. If I want to import wine into Singapore, what licenses do I need?
Okay, so again, a good question. Growing number of wine importers, there's a growing number of clearly wine being consumed in Singapore. So the critical thing here is to get your company in place, get customs registration in place, and then wine would come in under processed food. Okay, now there are liquor licenses. You don't need a liquor license to bring wine into Singapore. If you're going to sell it, you need a liquor license. The liquor license is not something you get from Singapore Food Agency. That comes from Singapore Police Force, and it's a whole separate application process. But just to import wine, you apply through Singapore Food Agency, and then when we do the cargo clearance permit on your behalf, we will calculate the duties and taxes. Again, that's a relatively straightforward area, but something that trips a lot of people up. So, please shout. Do feel free to ask for help.
Thank you so much, Neil. Okay, so just to wrap things up, okay, so here's a list of TNETS services for all the importers out there. Okay, so TNETS operates as a specialist in import and export procedures. We are committed to give you the best service and support. Our team of experts and trained practitioners are always ready to handle your customs, international trade, and tariff services. We are committed to give you the best service and support in trade compliance. Visit our website or drop us an email on how we can assist you with your imports of your products into Singapore. Thank you. And with that, we have come to the end of our webinar. Once again, we appreciate all of you for joining us. We certainly hope that this has been an informative webinar for you. So should you have any further inquiries, scan the QR code to access our email. And thanks again. We shall see you again next time.